This is the second Sunday of Advent, and we're reflecting on the story of John the Baptist, who was one of the greatest figures in Scripture. As Jesus said, there's no man greater than John the Baptist, born of woman. And it's interesting because Jesus calls him the greatest, and we know through what else Jesus has said that in order to be the greatest, you have to become the least. And that's exactly what John the Baptist lived in the sense that he said, I must decrease and he must increase. And so John the Baptist is this person who lived in humility, living his vocation with joy, with conviction, with boldness, and accepting what the Lord had for him. And yet, even in that humility and becoming the least, knowing that he had his own followers that he eventually would send to follow Jesus, to point the way, not to himself, but to Christ, in that littleness and that humility, John the Baptist is still not afraid to speak the truth, to speak it with conviction, to speak it with boldness, and to call people out in their sins. And I think sometimes in our own life we can get confused in thinking that humility is simply being passive and not speaking up when it's time to. We can think that, well, if I'm going to be Christian, I have to be nice and I don't want to create tension. But we see with John the Baptist, even though he was the smallest to become the greatest, he still was able to call people out, and he calls them out in their sin. When I think of this boldness accompanied by this great humility and meekness, I think of Mother Teresa, who is this little sister who was, able to go out and to serve the world's poorest of the poor, but also, even in her littleness, was not afraid to call out the truth to people who needed to hear it. And one example of this was in 1979 when she received the Nobel Peace Prize. She was standing in front of her audience, which is filled with many people. In a sense, the world was her audience. And she was not afraid to call out the evil of abortion. And she said, the greatest destroyer of peace in the world today is abortion. And so even in that littleness, where she tries to be that pencil within the hand of God, she still recognizes her need to tell the truth and to call people out in their sin, especially those who are world leaders, those who are in a position of authority, to point out to them that they need to have that conversion of heart. And so even in our own lives, there could be co-workers, there could be family members, that we shouldn't be afraid to speak out the truth to them, always with love and with charity in that littleness, but to recognize that in order to call people to the truth, it's not to lead people to ourselves. It's to lead people to Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life, so that we might decrease and he might increase.